Hello there, Simon Stokes here from subSine Academy in Glasgow, and thank you very much for tuning in to part 4 of this course, which is going to focus on the mix down of your track. So it's basically the idea of taking what we've made, really trying to refine each of the individual sounds, bringing out the best bits of them, cutting away the bits which don't work, setting their levels correctly, getting the panning and effects and the kind of stereo width that we want from our track, and really trying to just get it up to that kind of professional level where it starts to sound really decent. So in order to do that, we're going to, look through different things like grouping. By now you should probably have your track grouped. If we look at the track that I've got here, I've got it into a bunch of different groups. I've got my low end, so if I was to sort that out, this contains my kick drum and a kind of another group of my bass line. You don't have to do that, that's just something I quite like to do because I quite like to treat these together. You see I've got a filter on them that I've been using to bring in and out in the project, so that works quite nice. I've got all my hi-hats in a group here, and that's just quite nice because they're all quite similar sounding things. So, and I've applied a little bit of effects to them and just kind of worked them together. It's quite nice to treat them as one. You can get a sense of sort of unity or cohesion if you have things all grouped together and processed together as well. We can obviously still go in and work on the individual sounds, which we will do, and get them sort of all sort of performing at their best. That's what we're trying to do in this mix down section, is get everything performing at its very, very best so that we've got a good sound to our project. I've got my percussion group here. It's got some general percussion. I'm going to put this in the loop here. General percussion elements. I've got an effects group with all my kind of whooshes and swooshes that we made, and I've got a kind of group with all my musical elements now as well. Let's give this a different colour to my percussion. Let's keep it all nice and tidy. It's a good way of working. So now that they're all grouped up, it means that we can process these elements as a whole, and we can also still get access to the individual elements. And this is really important in the mix down, to be able to process things together as well as separately. So grouping is a really nice thing, and in Live 10 they added the functionality to put groups within groups. So if you wanted to process these three slightly differently to the other two, you can group them together, Control G, Command G, and it adds a new group inside that group. So just remember to do that with your project. It also just keeps things nice and tidy, really easy to look at when you open your project again the next time, and it's not just this cluster flip of different elements all over the place. So we've got our musical elements all grouped together. We need to take a little look at the other side, our kind of mixer section here, to get this set up and ready for our kind of mixing. This is where having two screens can come in quite handy actually. If you have a second screen for your setup, then on one screen you can have your arrangement view here, and on the other screen you can have your mixer view. And it's quite nice to have these faders as well as the arrangement, so you can skip to different parts, set levels without having to tab backwards and forwards. That is quite a nice addition, being able to do that. It also means if you do use third-party plugins, which we've not really touched on yet, but you might want to eventually start picking up some of these third-party plugins. I've got tons on my studio computer. I've got slightly less on here. But yeah, for mixing and mastering, these things can be really, really handy. You get different EQs, different even synthesizers, drum machines, but in this process we're looking at EQs, compressors, limiters, that sort of thing. So yeah, you can have them all popping up on a separate screen as well, which can be really handy. It's not essential by any means at all, but it's just something you might want to look into. If you look down at the mixer section here, a few things we've not looked at really are these sort of decibel readouts. So if I play my project from here, let's just unsolo this. You see that these sort of oval bits here are called your peak level meters, and these are showing the loudest that anything has gone on that particular channel. So they're a readout of decibels, and you've probably heard of decibels as a way of measuring loudness or volume, you might call it. So decibels are a measure of loudness intensity, so it's kind of a way of measuring sound. And you can see the way that we use them in music production is that 0 decibels is the loudest that anything can go. That's where that clipping line is there. That is 0 dB. So nothing nothing can go louder than that. That's why we set that at 0. So it's like that is the very maximum. Seems a bit counterintuitive, but then we go away from that as you drop down. This is minus 12 dB, minus 24 decibels, minus 36, all the way down. And you can see it's kind of logarithmic. So actually, when we turn this down 1 decibel here, if I use the down arrow and turn it down 1 decibel, it actually drops more in volume than if I turn it down 1 decibel down here. So it's kind of strange the way that decibels work. They work on this logarithmic scale. We don't need to worry about it too much, but just know that obviously 0 dB is at the point where it starts to clip. You definitely don't want to do that. So we get a nice readout here of our kind of peak levels. And what we're really trying to do in this section is create a nice pre-master. So if you think about the process of production, we have 2 very distinct kind of phases to our production, I think. One where you're being very creative, coming up with ideas, arranging those ideas and kind of getting all the musical stuff down and sorted. And then another hat that you put on is your kind of mix down hat, which is just getting the track up to level and creating a pre-master which you send off to a mastering engineer for mastering. So that's what we're trying to do in this section essentially, and that's what we want to focus on. So when we're doing that, what we're looking at on the right hand side over here, right where our master channel is that we're making sure that it doesn't clip at all. So at the moment it's not clipping at all, and what we're aiming for is that we're kind of bouncing around here. The maximum we're peaking at is around about minus 3 decibels or something. You see mine's maybe just a little touch too hot at the moment. I'm coming very close to clipping. See, I'm within a decibel of clipping on my master channel right now. So, you know, I could go through each of my groups, maybe turn them down a couple of decibels. Let's bring this down 2, down 2. Just using the down arrow works quite nice for this. Then you get them all down by the same ratio. That's just my references, so that doesn't matter. And you see now that I've done that, I'm peaking around about minus 4 dB. That's a really nice level for me to kind of sit at on my master. It means that I've got a little bit of breathing space for kind of louder elements in the track that might pop up and have a bit of a higher dynamic range. But when I send this off to a mastering engineer, they've also got a little bit of headroom to play with when they're working. So that means that they can boost some frequencies, they can boost the level, they can sort of rebalance things a little bit and turn it up. The very final process in your music production of a track is sending it off to a mastering engineer to finish off. So you pretty much always do that. I master tracks for other labels. I master stuff for artists, and I work as a mastering engineer, have done for many, many years, but I don't master my own music. I send it off to my good friend Connor Dalton at Glowcast Mastering. He's amazing, and get him to sort of finish it off. He does all of Soma Records mastering, and he's done all of mine over the years as well. So it doesn't matter how good you get at music production, you still always sort of hand off at the last stage to a mastering engineer. So what we're trying to do here is create a pre-master, which is basically getting the mix of and balance of your track as good as you possibly can, and then we render off a single WAV file at the end, a single file, not a multi-track project at all, and send that off to a mastering engineer to sort of finish off. So that's what we're trying to do. And yeah, like I said, to do that, you need to leave a little bit of headroom. So they normally recommend between 3 and 6 decibels of headroom is perfect on our master. So we're going to look at setting our levels a little bit in a minute. But actually mine are pretty good because I've been sort of mixing it as I go along, so I'm not clipping or too low or anything like that. So I've just been very roughly setting levels. We're going to do it more precisely as we go. So each track has its own decibel meter there, showing the loudest that that track's been, and every time you press space it resets and will always hold the loudest. So if I pull this down, you see that's still holding the loudest that that track has been. Just undo that and take it back. And you can actually stretch these faders out a bit. So you see where all the faders of the mixer section are. If we hover our mouse here and drag up, do you see what happens is we get a longer fader to mix with, and we also get this extra readout which shows us the position of the fader currently. So currently this fader is turned down 2 decibels from the top, from 0 dB there. So it doesn't have anything to do with the actual level coming out the track, it's just the position of this fader currently. So you see as I pull this down, I get a readout of where the fader is currently. It's just quite handy that for when you're wanting to bring things up and down a little bit, when you're doing the kind of fine tuning in the mix down section. I recommend having longer faders. Similarly, we've got our kind of sends and returns here. We can hide these. Let's just get rid of them just now. Sends and returns, don't need them just now. So that gives us a bit more space to play with here as well. So there's lots of really important parts to the mix down. It's just making sure you understand a little bit about decibels, a little bit about what we're looking for here, and that lets us sort of set the balance of things really nicely. It's also worth remembering just about spectrum. So let's go and grab an audio effect, and I'm going to put spectrum onto my master track. Now spectrum, if you remember, is a kind of way of visualizing the sound in the project. The more you get used to using spectrum, the more you can actually tell from it. So if you remember that the low frequencies down the left hand side, this is all what would be referred to as bass, I suppose, down the left here. So you can see my kick and bass line, particularly all this low end stuff is mainly low frequencies, and yeah, there's some high frequencies. The top of the kick drum there is quite high, and then there's some mid frequencies from my bass line, but primarily these are low frequencies. My hi-hats are primarily high frequencies. My percussion has kind of got a good range, and my synths are kind of all over the place as well. There's some very low frequencies, there's some very high frequencies there, so we might want to tame them, play with them, and that's part of what this section is about. So we're going to work with that. Just keep spectrum in mind. We're going to use this quite a lot as we're working through this section. So really that's what we're looking at doing. We're going to set our levels, we're going to set our panning, get nice stereo width on things. We're going to be setting effects, EQing, equalizer, and using filters, and we've already grouped our tracks. So that's the kind of process of mixing down. So now you can move on to the next video, and we're going to take a look at the different EQs that we've got inside of Live.